State lawmakers have wrapped up their legislative session for the year in Albany. And heading into the summer, the question for many with prison communities in their districts is when the governor will release the so-called hit list of prisons the state plans to close. And Senator Dan Stec joins us now. Welcome. It's good to see you again.
You too, Tom.
We're waiting to hear any day now from the Hochul administration if it's going to put out its list of prisons that it plans to close this summer. The state's budget agreement allows the governor to close up to 5 more. Have you had any advance notice of which prisons could be targeted or closed?
No, they've kept that very close. You know, my personal belief is that this is driven by staffing issues. They don't have enough staff. They can't hire people. They ought to be asking the question, why can't we hire corrections officers? These jobs used to be highly sought. I can tell you why. The corrections officer union can tell you why. The job's gotten more difficult, more dangerous. They'll tell you they get stuck, mandatory, double shifts all the time. That affects your health, that affects your family life. So I think what the game plan is likely is that they're going to close a prison that is in close proximity to others so they can scavenge the staff. Now, if that's the case, then the good news is that whatever the prisons that are closed in the state, the people that will be losing their job in that prison will have a job in a prison, and they won't have to relocate, and deal with new schools and all that. But how we got here and the direction of criminal justice in the state, it's well documented over the last 5-6 years. The policies that we've had in these prison closures. Big beef that I've had with that is that we close them, and as a state we walk away. We walk away from the expense of the legacy costs. New York State as the landowner, and what bothers me even more is in the Adirondack Park, where we gnash our teeth over how many lot subdivision are we going to allow, 4 units or 6 units, that these are the great environmental concerns of the administration in Albany, and yet as the landowner in the case of Camp Gabriels, 48 structures on 100 acres, they have asbestos in them, they have lead in them, that's okay to let that go to blight. So in the future, I'm going to be saying, if you're going to close a prison, you don't close a prison unless you have a documented, this is the plan for that property. They haven't done that, and so in the case of Lion Mountain or Camp Gabriels, more recently Moriah Shock or the Clinton Annex, Mount McGregor down in Saratoga County, they're rotting, they're falling apart, and they are a blight on the community. The other shame of it is out of the 44 prisons in the state, every prison is afraid they're on the list. They're all mentally prepared. That's a lot of stress to put on your workforce. Up to 5, hopefully it's not 5, hopefully it's less than that. I've got my fingers crossed. It's not in my district, not in the North Country.
And you talk about Camp Gabriels, closed 15 years ago, still trying to find a reuse for it, trying to find a new owner, and you've been dealing with the issue of it being in the Adirondack Park, being on state forest preserve land. Your amendment passed in the Senate for the fifth straight year. Yeah. And yet on the Assembly side, no vote in 5 years?
No vote in 5 years. So it's passed every year in the state Senate. And again, that's not a ding on the Assembly sponsor. I was in the Assembly for 8 years, so I know how that House works too. There is somebody over there, whether it's a chair of a committee or a staff member in a key position, but there is somebody whose name we don't know that is a holdup. And I think that we as taxpayers, as residents, we have the right, somebody ought to let us know who's holding this up and what is the reason. And if it's a good reason, then we'll try to mitigate and address that. If it's not a good reason, then let it be spoken so everyone can shout it down and say that's not a reason to hold this up. Because they didn't take action in the Assembly this year, we will lose 2 more years. 2 years from now, it'll be very difficult to say, let's find a buyer for Camp Gabriels. 2 years from now, the drumbeat from me will be, put it in the budget, money to demolish that and clean it up. Because 2 years from now, they're going to be, I've seen them, I've toured them, they're in poor condition now. In 2 years, they're going to be literally falling into the ground and no one will want them.
Your amendment, again, would basically take Camp Gabriels out, put other land, do a land swap?
It would be the value of the sale of Gabriels. That money would go to buying new forest preserve.
You mentioned the other two prisons. Moriah Shock is the latest one to be closed. Is there any hope that when the state talks about possibly using prison sites for housing, has there been any talk at all that Moriah Shock might be a good facility for that?
I know that the locals have been pushing very hard, and they've been making the calls to every state agency that they could, trying to see if there's interest in a state police academy opening there, DEC potentially using that for something, potentially for housing. That could easily be converted into something. Time is not its friend either. But on the, going back to the 3 prison issue, it may not need an amendment if the state is going to continue to use it. If it stays in the state use, then it doesn't need a constitutional amendment. And again, they closed it without a plan for it.
Dan Stec, thank you. We appreciate it as always.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tom.